students, it's me, Mrs. Finner. We just read the chapter Understanding. So I'd like you to think of a couple questions from that chapter. I'm just going to grab my notebook briefly. So some questions I wanted you to ponder during that chapter of Understanding is, why do we think that that chapter was called Understanding? So why was it titled as such? And what was understood in that chapter? So what was the topic, the fact, the story that was understood? Pretty cool. So now we're going to read the chapter titled Little Talk. And if you remember back to, I believe it was chapter 4, Connor had a little talk with his mom, right? His mom. And now he's going to have a little talk with his grandma. So you're going to be doing a comparison and contrast assignment about these chapters. So I want you to be thinking about comparing, saying how these chapters are alike, and contrasting, saying how they're different. Or how can we compare, say how it's alike, and contrast the talk that Connor has with his mom about her diagnosis and her treatments, and the one he's about to have in this chapter with his grandmother. So let's jump into it. After school, his grandma was waiting for him on the couch, right? "We need to have a talk," she said, before he even got the door shut, and there was a look on her face that made him stop, a look that made his stomach hurt. "What's wrong?" he asked. His grandmother took in a long, loud breath through her nose and stared out of the front of the window, as if gathering herself. She looked like a bird of prey, a hawk that could carry off a sheep. "Your mother has to go back to the hospital," she said. "You're going to come and stay with me for a few days. You'll need to pack a bag." Connor didn't move. "What's wrong with her?" His grandma's eyes widened for just a second, as if she couldn't believe he was asking a question so cataclysmically stupid. Then she relented. "There's a lot of pain," she said. There's a lot of pain, she said. "More than there should be." "She's got medicine for her pain," Connor started, but his grandmother clapped her hands together just once, but loud enough to stop him. "It's not working, Connor," she said crisply, and it seemed like she was looking just over his head rather than at him. "It's not working." "What's not working?" His grandma tapped her hands together lightly a few more times, like she was testing them out or something. And then she looked out of the window again, all the while keeping her mouth firmly shut. She finally stood, concentrating on smoothing down her dress. "Your mom's upstairs," she said. "She wants to talk to you, but your father's flying in on Sunday." He straightened up. "Dad's coming?" "I've got some calls to make," she said, stepping past him and out of the front door, talking on her mobile. That's like her cell phone, right? "Why is Dad coming?" he called after her. "Your mom's waiting," she said, pulling the front door shut behind her. Connor hadn't even had the chance to put down his rucksack. So his rucksack is his backpack, remember? His father was coming. His father from America, who hadn't come since the Christmas before last, whose new wife always seemed to suffer emergencies at the last minute that kept him from visiting more often, especially now that the baby was born. Let me just move myself. Sorry, guys. Especially now since the baby was born. His father, who Connor had grown used to not having around, as the trips grew less frequent and the phone calls got further and further apart. His father was coming. Why? "Connor?" He heard his mom call. She wasn't in her room. She was in his, lying back on his bed, on top of his duvet, gazing out of the window to the churchyard up the hill, and the yew tree, which was just a yew tree. "Hey, darling," she said, smiling at him from where she lay, but he could tell by the lines around her eyes that she was really hurting like he'd only seen her hurt once before. She had to go to the hospital then as well, and hadn't come out for nearly 2 weeks. It had been last Easter, the week his grandma's had almost been the death of them both. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Why are you going back to the hospital?" She patted on the duvet next to her to get him to come and sit down. He stayed where he was. "What's wrong?" She still smiled, but it was tighter now, and she traced her fingers along the threaded pattern of the duvet, grizzly bears that Connor had outgrown years ago. She had tied her red rose scarf around her head, but only loosely, and he could see her pale scalp underneath. He didn't think that she'd even pretended to try on any of Grandma's old wigs. I'm going to be okay, she said. I really am. Are you? He asked. We've been here before, Connor, she said, so don't worry. I felt really bad, and I've gone in and they've taken care of it. That's what'll happen this time. She patted the duvet cover again. Won't you come and sit down next to your tired old mom? Connor swallowed, but her smile was brighter, and he could tell it was a real one. He went over and sat next to her on the side facing the window. She ran her hand through his hair, lifting it out of his eyes, and he could see how skinny her arm was, almost like it was just bone and skin. Why is Dad coming? He asked. His mother paused, then put her hand back down into her lap. It's been a while since you've seen him. Aren't you excited? Grandma doesn't seem too happy. His mother snorted. Well, you know how she feels about your dad. Don't listen to her. Enjoy his visit. They sat in silence for a moment. There's something else, Connor finally said. Isn't there? He felt his mother sit up a little straighter on her pillow. Look at me, son, she said gently. He turned his head to look at her, though he would have paid any amount of money not to have to do it. This latest treatment's not doing what it's supposed to, she said. And all that means is they're going to have to try to adjust it, try something else. Is that it? Connor asked. She nodded. That's it. There's lots more they can do. It's normal, don't worry. You sure? I'm sure. Because... And here Connor stopped for a second and looked down at the floor. Because you could tell me, you know? And then he felt her arms around him, her thin, thin arms that used to be so soft when she hugged him. She didn't say anything, just held on to him. He went back to looking out of the window, and after a moment, his mother turned to look too. That's a yew tree, you know, she finally said. Connor rolled his eyes, but not in a bad way. Yes, Mom, you've told me 100 times. Keep an eye on it for me while I'm away, will you? She said. Make sure it's still here when I get back. And Connor knew that this was her way of telling him that she was coming back. So all he did was nod, and they both kept looking out at the tree, which stayed a tree no matter how long they looked. That is the end of the chapter Little Talk. Thanks, guys.